Chi do's and don'ts, okay? And there's so much video content on YouTube over Tai Chi and martial arts in general. So a lot of these things that I'm talking about are not just Tai Chi, but Kung Fu stuff in general, and the way that we use the body and the body mechanics. And then none of this is in order, they're just different we'll say, talking points. And then the last one, I just put it there because it's kind of a different subject, but it's kind of the same thing. So I'm going to start with shifting instead of sinking, and rocking and leaning, and the straightening of the leg. Okay? I know that sounds like a lot, but it's not really. So a lot of the stuff when people do Tai Chi, and I'm going to do this 2 directions. So whether I utilize an upright posture like this, or a posture this way, both of these situations, my posture is straight. You know what I mean? My knee is bent, I'm straightening it down. This way, the knee is straight. If I do it this way, you can see that my shoulder, my hip, my knee, and my ankle all are in alignment. Just like when I'm here, the knee, the hip, and the shoulder are in alignment. Okay. A lot of people, I'm not, you know, when I speak of these things, I'm talking about, it can be somebody that's very much a beginner, or somebody that's been teaching for a while, or anywhere in between, where the body mechanics may not be the best. And it's not like pointing fingers at people and stuff like that, but a lot of people that come to Tai Chi, they're coming to it for health, or wellness, you know, wellness, and if we look at it from the health aspect, fitness, right? Other people do it because they want to learn Tai Chi because they think it would be an interesting martial arts system to learn, but usually for self-defense. And either one of those things are great, but we need to maximize the usefulness of the body, right? So when I do the movements, and when I'm talking about leaning or shifting, when people do the movements, instead of, see, I'm sinking and I drop. I sink and I drop. Instead of doing that, they shift, and you see how in essence, I'm kind of like leaning backwards. And this puts a lot of load in my lower back. When I was talking about the people that come to Tai Chi for fitness, a lot of them are 40, 45 plus to 80s, and a lot of them already have either poor flexibility or mobility, or potentially the leg muscles and the core muscles are just not as strong as they could be. Or they have pre-existing conditions, like a lot of people have a bad back, and it's not necessarily the spine, it's potentially sometimes it's the muscles, and everything is weak and sitting in chairs all the time, and so standing up and things like that can just exacerbate it. So also knees, you know, neck, things like that, right? So if I'm doing this and I'm doing movements like this, when I shift backwards, then I'll put this load here in something that already hurts, right? Or as I move forward, I drive into the knee, or lean back. Now there are the people that rock too. They do like this, and you know, I don't know if this was. I don't think it's worse than the shift back and lean, but it's not good for the body. If I was doing this for a fighting application, I would want to keep my body under me so that I can either contend with the force that's being, we'll say, applied toward me, right? So I can absorb it, borrow it, redirect it, or just contend with it. But if I lean like this, I lock out my hip. And in locking out my hip, I make it so it's easy to topple me, right? So, you know, if you're doing your Tai Chi and you're doing like this, if you feel I'm exaggerating, there's some people that actually do the movements that much. Some, you know, maybe it's here. But if I lock this, if you're doing push hands, one of the things is I want to try to lock your hip. If I can lock your hip, then I'm making it where you can't transfer weight down into the legs. If you can't transfer the weight down in the legs to, we'll say, absorb it and borrow from it, then it's going to be easy to knock you over, right? So why would I want to do myself like this? Well, maybe they just do it for health, and they don't do push hands, and they don't do application of the movements, they don't do any wrestling or sparring, etc. Still, if I'm doing it just for health, I still don't want to do this to my back or to the back of the people that I'm teaching. So it's kind of important, but we'll hit back on it again. So the other part is the leg, right? So it's not necessarily the leg, it's the knee. This is my knee right here, and I'm going to do it two directions. So say they go to shoot back and they lean, and they straighten this leg out all the way, and not necessarily anything wrong with that, but it's when they go back, again, they're not utilizing muscle, they're trying to use the skeletal system more than the muscle. I want them both to work together, not rely on the skeleton to kind of do this and the connective tissue, but I want to use those muscles. I want to engage them so I can drive with them, right? And this knee, if you notice when I do this, I don't elongate it, right? I mean, I could, but I don't have to. I can leave it like this. And then when I go back forward, see, the knee doesn't really, I'm not pushing into this joint, right? This joint is to stabilize me. It's the stabilizer muscle. It's the stabilizing joint. So here like this, but look, if I lean and I straighten it out and then I drive back forward, a lot of people do this and they drive all of that force into the knee. If you have bad knees, you're going to exacerbate the problem. You know, your issue with your knees. Also, too, if I do it this way, right, or I lean and I push into the knee, if I'm doing it for application and I want to push someone or hit them, whatever, and I drove all of this into this knee, I'm either going to have to take the weight off of the knee to adjust the shift. If I try to pick this leg up, I have all of this weight and force being pushed into the knee. Very hard, right? But if I'm here like this and I drive, look, I can easily pick my knee up, but if I put force into it, it's harder to hold it up because I have all of this weight here that I don't want. So it makes it harder for me to be able to move, right? If you notice in Taiji, a lot of it is, there's a lot of changing angles and lines and positions. And from here, I can easily step multiple directions, or to the side, or step back and through, or here, I can step here. You follow me, but if I have all of this weight in it, I have to shift the weight off to be able to pull the leg up to move it. I want to be able to make that leg so that even if I'm here and even if I've got weight forward, it's not pushing out past my leg, right? So, easy for me to pick the leg up and move it. Put weight on it, it's harder. Rolling the hip forward or back. It's not so much that you're rolling the hip forward or back, but it's leading the hip rolled forward or rolled back. Like I don't really teach it publicly anymore. I mean, I'm not saying that because it makes it special or something. But I still teach somebody Wing Chun if they wanted to learn it. But the last couple of years, I've really concentrated on Squat Jiao and on Chongxi Taiji, and some auxiliary things that would go with that. I'll give you an example of Wing Chun. In Wing Chun, you're here, you start, and you open up, and a lot of people, when they do this, they roll the hip forward, and they're in this elongated position like this. Okay, if I do this, it makes it very difficult, not impossible, but it makes it harder for me to breathe from my lower abdomen, okay? I want my hip to float, right, like this. So it's easier for me to take these deep breaths from down here, right? Same thing if you roll the hip backwards and the butt sticking out. Now you're going to put this undue stress on your lower spine or forward. Makes it hard to breathe. And two, my hip is locked. So it's easier for people to destabilize me. If the hip's floating and something pushes into me, it's easier for me to absorb it or change it. The same thing if I'm in something like a forward bow stance. I can be like this, but my hip is not one way or the other. I let it float. So when I do a movement, like something like this roll back, I literally roll the hip, and then I roll the hip back. The waist in Tai Chi and martial arts in general, it should be supple and it should be loose. The muscles should be able to move with the body's movement. Not just a twist this way, but it should be able to move in varying directions. And that's how I'm going to generate the most force or be able to stabilize me the most, right? It's like walking. When you walk, you're going to contract the core muscles to stabilize you as you swing the leg forward and the weight goes out, right? It's no different if I was going to do Tai Chi and I go to do a push, my core is going to stabilize this. But if I can get to the point where my core is supple and loose and moves freely, I still have the opportunity to contract it and to help to stabilize, but it also helps me to generate more force in a quicker or response time. I don't know if that's making sense or not. So I see people and they won't lean, but they will round the back, right? So they round the back, and by rounding the back, they're rolling the hip. You follow me? And then once the hip is rolled, it's hard to breathe from down here. Easy as somebody put pressure on you if you couldn't move, or you couldn't, we'll say, roll the hip quick enough, you're going to lock this and you're going to become destabilized. It's going to be harder for you to move, to be able to execute movements. Right? Again, if I'm here and I execute the movement, I want to be able to keep the hip floating. Even if I do something and I need to stabilize the muscles in the core to keep my body as a piece, I want to be able to keep the hip and pelvis supple. So again, if I do it like this, guarantee those people, if they roll the hip, it's harder for them to breathe. It's impinging the lower spine. Neither one of those two things are good. Using the knees for mobility instead of stability. So this is, the elbow joint is the stability joint. The knee is the stability joint. The hip, the ankle, the wrist, the shoulders, those are mobility joints. The lower portion of my spine is for mobility. The upper part of my spine is for stability. My neck is predominantly for mobility. Turn and twist and all of that stuff, right? So if you can easily put things into that perspective. So what people do is they turn on the knee instead of on the foot. A prime example is this kind of stuff. The knee is like this, and they go to do this movement, and they turn on the knee. See what I mean? Instead of turning with the foot. Or they're going to do something backwards, back, and instead of turning, they leave it there. And they apply all of this additional pressure in the knee that doesn't need to be, right? Here, here. Now, if you're doing some particular lineage and, it's like McDonald's, right, or Burger King. It's got to have 3 pickles and, I don't know, a shot of mustard on one side, ketchup on the other, whatever. I'm just trying to give an example. And maybe you want to really stick with that. But if you look at what I'm saying realistically, it's a long-term use. No matter what activity you do for combat sports, martial arts, or we took it into other worlds like golfing, and tennis, and anything like that, you're going to do excessive amount of certain movements, and if they're not done properly, that's how you're going to end up hurting the joints or the body in general. And so we want to make sure that we avoid that, whether we're doing Tai Chi or we're doing handball or we're doing, I don't know, you pick a sport. And if that doesn't make sense to you, and you think that, Tai Chi is this special thing and it's not going to hurt me, that's a wrong thing. You can just as easily hurt, especially your knees and your lower back from doing Tai Chi, by doing it wrong. And that wrong stuff again, I'm just going to keep reiterating this as I go. driving into the knee, right, or rounding the back and driving in the knee, or leaning and locking out. This kind of stuff, right? You're driving into the leg. And then this one here, right? I don't want to use the knee as a mobility point, right? Well, you know, Paul, it should be like that. Okay, but still, there's a point where it, you know, it could go further, and it will take the stress and the load off of my knee joints. I'll come back and I'll do the next action, right? And you know, like stuff like this, people come here, or the foot's like this, and then look, all of this pressure is already in the knee. And then you say you turn through, and a lot of them will roll the knee out past the foot. You see this? This is really bad. They'll do this, and then they'll let it pop, right, and it turns. Instead of being here and then turning the foot to turn the knee, so you keep this alignment so you don't hurt anything. Not shifting weight enough when turning on the feet. This is another one. And this affects the knees again. It also affects your ability just to execute the stuff. Right, so like, you know, in a nutshell, say my weight's 50-50, but now I put it all over here, right? I want to be able to freely turn my whole leg. Now, if I keep the weight over here, I can still do it, but I'm going to put all this additional pressure into my knee, around my knee, as I'm doing that, right? You know, they say don't be double rooted. Well, there's more to that, but to me, it's not a all or nothing. It's a shifting, it's an ebb and a flow, right? If I want to do this, I need to be able to turn the feet. So if you're doing movements, right, even this stuff this way, right, and I go to do this action, it makes sense to be able to turn the leg so I can turn the foot so I don't put all this undue stress into my joints. Stopping, hesitating, pausing. That's not necessarily something that's going to hurt your body, but think of it like this. It's like if you know, different people's opinions on chi and what chi is and all of that. But let's just say for today's purposes, it is the circulation of oxygen and blood flow, my nervous system. These things are all like I'm driving a vehicle, right? And I'm going down the highway and I'm going 60 miles an hour, and I'm, you know, been driving for 10 miles, and I'm going to drive another 50 miles, and I'm going to try to average at 60 miles an hour. Well, if I started speeding up, you know, maybe to 100, and then I slow back down to 20, and I go back up to 80, it's going to affect the flow of the motor, how the motor's working. It's going to affect how much gas it's using. Potentially, it can make it overheat. All kind of things to affect it. That is one way to look at what I'm talking about. I need to keep this continuity, this flow of we'll say my body's energy and how I use my body. So I want to be able to keep moving and do whatever the action is without some kind of pause or hesitation. And if I'm having to go chop, 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 I mean, maybe if you're a beginner, and that's okay. But if you've been doing it for a long time, and so I don't know, you do some move, and now you're going to do this single whip, and you want to pause to pose or something, to show this movement. That's not practical, and it doesn't do anything for the application of the movement, and it's not helping you with the flow of the movement by doing these pauses like this, or these, let's say, like a pose, right? Don't need that. You might disagree with me, whatever. There are some teachers that teach like that. There's certain movements in the form, and they want to emphasize them, not just in this, I mean, like in the Swajal, there's movements, like stuff like this. And it's done to be paused or dynamic, static or dynamic. But the reason behind this, I'm working on my stability, my balance as well, and spatial awareness. Where am I, right? But that's not what I'm doing. I'm doing this in Tai Chi, right? I'm not. There's no reason to make that pause. Okay? Looking down. A lot of beginners they do this because they want to see where their feet are. If you're still doing it 6 months later or a year later, you've developed a bad habit and you need to do whatever you can to break that habit. Because it's not just affecting you, your intention and where your gaze is on what you're trying to do, but it also affects the overall shape of the movement and the body structure. If I'm always looking down, I'm potentially affecting my posture, the way my body looks, versus if I keep my crown up and my body is here in this X position, versus me looking down. It's going to change all that. Potentially, too, it also could affect your breathing. Meaning, if I'm all kind of crumpled over, then I might not be able to expand as much as I want to or need to. So be sure to look forward and ahead. Now, if you have mirrors like this, it's easy. I can see my feet in the mirror without a problem. I can look straight up here and I can see my feet. Mirrors are great for development. But again, try not to look down. No intention. No intention. You don't need of that. I'm talking real intention. Meaning, I have a lady that I teach, and she's 82, her name's Mary. She's never, she's not, I have students in their, 30s and 20s and 40s too, right? But, I mean, she's never going to fight with this stuff. But about, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 weeks ago, I go to give her a lesson. And she had this whole list of Tai Chi movements, and she wanted to know what each one of them did. So for that whole hour session, we just went through and we discussed the intention of each of those movements. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about esoteric stuff where you're going to transmute and you're going to send energy into somebody else, or you think you're going to do this other stuff. That's not what I mean. I mean, this is a push. This is a pull. This is a strike. This is a control. This is a throw. Right? If you know what the movement is, your mind's going to process it like that, and the co-pilot part of your mind is going to help to stabilize you to do that push or to do that pull. And it also will make your movements look more fulfilling, meaning like they look like they have purpose. And that's what I mean by intention. Rolling on the heel when not needed. This is some flamboyant stuff that a lot of the forms that were created since the 1950s, starting with the 24 form, the 88 step, and the 32 sword form. From that point on, with the Chinese sports group, commission, whatever it may be called, they built these forms for competition, for health, and all of that. And some of the movements are just, it's okay to shift, but there's things that are just, there's not needed. And things I'm talking about is this stuff, where, however you did this, if you shifted this way or you sunk this way, that's not, I'm talking about this way. So they shift back and then they roll the foot up, and then they roll the foot out, right? And then they even pick the foot up and set it down, and then they roll the foot out. And maybe they pick it up, and then they set it down, and then they roll the foot out. Or they're going to turn around